The people that created the remote viewing program, they hypothesized a place called the Matrix, where all information resides in the universe, basically. And remote viewing plugs into the Matrix. It's kind of like a giant um, cosmic database, basically. And it's interesting to note that the movie, the 1999 movie, The Matrix,
Mm.
took the title of the film from the Stargate program, basically.
I've got in front of me Brian Lightfoot from Montreal, Canada. Brian's been a remote viewer for going on 15 years. The last 10 years, he's been most active as a professional remote viewer. Brian, how are you?
Yeah, yeah, good, good. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. It's amazing the kind of support we have in our wider remote viewing community. It's really been a good journey over these years. My background is in psychology and writing as well, and so in the kind of the local history of our society, when you're interested in things relating to human nature, back then you were kind of told to go into psychology. But at one point, I started to do a lot of meditation. And I started to have mystical experiences that were quite strange, actually. And so I began to realize that, what we see around us it's not the whole story. It's not maybe most of the story of what's really going on in reality. And so uh, at that point, I realized I had to kind of, follow the rabbit hole wherever it was going to go at that point. So um, and so I just began to study mysticism and consciousness as opposed to psychology. And over the years, I came across the concept of remote viewing. I didn't really know what it was. And at that time, I guess it was probably a YouTube video that was a very short, 15-minute kind of guided imagery remote viewing thing. And little did I know that that's not really what remote viewing is. And then through more research, I began to realize that there was a military program behind it. Then I learned more about the Stargate program. I found the Farsight Institute course at that time, which was a free online course, but it was very, very difficult actually because there was no support. So I mean, you could do the training exercises, but it was very difficult to actually understand um, where you were making errors and getting feedback and things like that. So that was very, very difficult at that time. I think they have more advanced training and more detailed kind of things where you can get feedback at this point. But at that point you couldn't. And so I eventually came across Ed Dames's forums, at which point there was an obvious community there, which was really, really helpful. People could, you could ask questions to people and get feedback. And on there were a lot of private trainers, and then I took training with a few private trainers, introductory and then advanced. And then just through practice, you just become better and better with training targets and feedback. So that's kind of the trajectory of how I kind of got to where I am.
If you could just tell us a bit about the kind of remote viewing you're doing.
There's a lot of people who use the term, remote viewing, but it's not really military grade remote viewing. What most of the professionals do is derived from the military Stargate unit systems, basically. So, if someone's telling you, you're going to just kind of close your eyes and do a guided imagery kind of thing for 10 minutes, that's not really remote viewing in the sense of the professional systems that we're talking about now.
Okay.
Now, there was a version called extended remote viewing where you kind of did that. You closed your eyes and you kind of relaxed, and it was almost like a hypnotic regression. But that's a very specific form of that with detailed steps and things like that. So what we do is basically the military derived program where you're working on a piece of paper with a pen, a black pen, and you're making detailed sketches, and the whole session's about 45 minutes. You can do follow-on, for hours after that. And so you're getting a very clear schematic kind of drawing with data, and you're fitting it all together. So it's very detailed, it's very precise. There are specific stages involved in there. And so the one that I do is called technical remote viewing. It was derived by Ed Dames, who was involved. I don't know, I forget what his actual job titles were. I think he was the targeting officer at one point, and he was involved in the Stargate program.
So that's where I began too, with technical remote viewing, and also I think Norbert last week I had Norbert on.
Yeah.
He's a technical remote viewer too. So a lot of us, come from that area. I've heard it called a minimalist approach to CRV. What would you think about that?
Well, what I've been told was that the reason why Ed called it technical remote viewing was that uh, he broke the target into multiple archetypes. In the freehand sketch, you have your three or four, one or two or three or four archetypes, and that allows you to have more stage fours and for each archetype. And with those stage fours, you get more technical information. That's why he called it technical remote viewing. He was basically injecting more stage four opportunities in there, whereas in CRV you're just doing it once. You're basically for the whole target. You're only having one stage four.
Right.
Yeah, and then other methods that I've done. I started with SRV, which is from the Farsight Institute. I believe it's called scientific remote viewing. And that one was okay. I certainly experienced the effect of what remote viewing was using that. I think TRV is a little bit more efficient. You can do follow-on movements in 15 minutes, like for an element follow-on 15 minutes, whereas in SRV it would be a full 45-minute session for a simple element movement, basically. And really, I came to do technical remote viewing because there was more support. There was more follow-on learning ability with the community at that point. So, and that really helped everything, because I mean, you can learn it from a book, but it's kind of like there's a pace to remote viewing. It's a little bit more like learning how to dance rather than learning learning from a book. There's a certain pace, so it's a little bit more like an art than it is something you can learn from a book exclusively. So I think CRV is useful, and I'm familiar with some of the courses from Paul Smith, and so I think some of the things they do is great. Yeah.
Cool. You've worked with teams on some pretty interesting targets, some of which you might not be able to talk about at all, but I think you might be able to lead us into a few of those more interesting targets that you can talk about. And when you were talking about these, I guess for a lot of people, again, I think a lot of people coming to this program may not know a lot about remote viewing, and certainly probably have not done a course, but are thinking about doing it. We'll be quite interested in finding out how remote viewing can be applied to real world situations and issues.
The military program really derived CRV. And in CRV, within the military program itself, it was really designed to spy on physical locations. And so there was a famous scene in the movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, and the famous story about Pat Price, who was he was remote viewing something, and he was able to get to actually read documents within a location that was very close to his cottage. And it happened to be in a military establishment, and so they got the whole military unit got in huge trouble for that, to the ability that they could actually do that. And so it was derived to actually spy on physical locations and the Soviet Union and things like that. The real thing that Ed Dames has done in terms of pushing the limit in TRV is that he's taken it to the point where you can remote view concepts. And that's really the most of the work that we do as a group right now is we look at concepts. So, I've just looked at the future of the US election and what we see for that. You can look at a person's optimum trajectory in life. You can look at, conceptual ideas of some of the training targets. In TRV, we look at um, you know, historical and biblical concepts and things like that. So really the power of remote viewing is to look at concepts. What should I be doing in life? What's my optimum investment? What are my health issues? How can I solve situations like that kind of thing? So yeah. The way we do remote viewing is TRV. We have basically there's three phases of remote viewing. There's what's called cueing, there's the session itself, and then there's analysis. And kind of like very similar to when you write a computer program, you can have garbage in, garbage out. If you don't plan the whole flow of information from beginning to end, you can get into some real problems. And so the first phase would be cueing. Like what do we actually want to look at? What do we, how are we going to target the kind of the situation that we're looking at? And so, an example of a bad cue, and then just to give your audience some context, the remote viewer who's actually doing an actual session is typically completely blind to what the target is. They're only given a serial number, which is called a target reference number. It's often eight numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's what they're only given. And that the way it's set up, it's pointing to a particular topic. And so
The cue strikes me as being almost like it's a library search term. I mean, it's a question
yes,
you would put into a
yeah,
computer, the way you structure it to find something in a library, I'm talking big libraries. So,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, going from
And
general
so
to specific.
exactly. And there are recognized words. The people that created the remote viewing program, they hypothesized a place called the matrix, where all information resides in the universe, basically. And remote viewing plugs into the matrix. It's kind of like a giant um, cosmic database, basically. And it's interesting to note that the movie, the 1999 movie, The Matrix,
Mm.
took the title of the film from the Stargate program, basically. So the matrix itself tends to have certain words that it recognizes and certain words that it doesn't recognize. And so through trial and error over many, many years, the remote viewing community has developed words that make sense to the matrix. So, the word next is a very classic word to figure out, something that's going to happen in a preceding order, for example. And so certain words are recognized and certain words are not. So just through trial and error, we've, developed our own kind of language about how you structure cues.